Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much to the Film Festival for inviting us for what I think is an important and timely discussion around the subject of sustainability. Sustainability, as you will see during this discussion, is something which encapsulates both the green elements, the carbon footprint elements, but I think as we move on, we'll look at how sustainability takes in a whole lot of other things in terms of the social, the community, the kind of broader environment with a small e that I think we will be discussing. So we have as our guest here on the big screen, we have Veronique from The Green Shot. She will introduce her business, but it's one of those new businesses that is making a contribution, I think, to the way that the industry is perceiving its behavior and its approach in terms of the environment. We have Séverine from a spin-off of a part of the Torino Film Lab, and an increasingly important part of the Torino Film Lab is the Green Lab, which Séverine will talk about. She also has a background, I think, in a related and interesting movement that we will bring in around slow food, which sounds kind of interesting and intriguing, so stick with us on that. We have Bill here, who's the chair of FERA, which is a European organization for film directors. And he's going to introduce what I think is a really important initiative here around that broader sense of sustainability, which is a kind of manifesto looking at a commitment. It could maybe the start of a movement, a commitment to actions and behaviors by directors that could bring together the creative impulse to that sustainability discussion. And I think what we will look at with him is the idea that sustainability isn't a barrier to creativity. It can actually be a spur, a driver to new approaches to creativity. And hopefully we'll see how that develops as we go on. And we have MARTIJN from, who's a Dutch filmmaker, and again, on the board of FERA, but I think someone who's actually made his own successful series, HITA, which has been around talking or bringing together the idea of climate change in a way that is already dramatically appealing. But someone, again, I think will be able to look at how creativity and sustainability work together. So I'm Michael Gubbins. I work, I've been a consultant, journalist, and so on. I work with lots of different organizations around green issues, around industry change, around the digital economy. So that's our panel, and our discussion, I think, probably should begin with that idea of the environment and sustainability as the way that perhaps is best known. I'm going to start with you, Séverine, if I can. It feels like we've had a lot of initiatives around greener filmmaking. From your point of view, you're now doing labs and so on. Isn't this something that everyone already knows? Is this something that where the sustainability and the need to reduce your carbon footprint is already well established?
Okay. Well, Green Film Lab, it will be in June, the workshop number 6, and we always have received a lot of applications. Green Film Lab. The aim of Green Film Lab is to raise awareness on environmentally sustainable practices on set, and to train industry professionals on how to get a certification. And since we receive a lot of applications, I think that we still need to raise this awareness. Because, we are not the only one. Well, obviously our Green Film Lab is great, but there are a lot of trainings, especially in Europe. Well, Albert in UK was the pioneer in this field. In Germany, there are a lot of trainings too. So yeah, I think we still need them, because well, it seems that there are too many labs, too many workshops, but maybe it's not enough, because people need to know, and people need to have that small story about climate change repeating and repeating again.
Yeah, it's easy to lose the train of thought, and complacency can kick in very quickly. I guess there is a lot of legislation now that you know, a lot of regulation that forces you top down to be more aware of your environmental responsibilities. But I'm interested more in when you're in a lab scenario. Give some examples of what comes out of those scenarios that actually you think is making a difference. And is it something where the solutions are still moving? You know, they're still changing.
Yeah. We have in our lab, we have different profiles. We have the sustainability managers, we have a producer, a director, a scriptwriter, and they all, it seems that they all understand that they can do something. So it's not only something for the producer, you know. The producer have to appoint or hire a sustainability manager, but the scriptwriter can do something even before. The director has to be on board, has to have the intention to become more green. So yeah.
I think that's really important as part of the conversation when we come to Bill and Martin as well. It's that idea of taking responsibility yourselves at whatever level you're at. Sometimes the problem of those big carbon targets and so on, the top-down side is it almost makes people feel that's someone else's problem. But what you're creating here, I think, is a sense that this is everyone's problem, right from the very development stage all the way through to the end.
It's a team's effort, really. Absolutely. It's a team's effort, and in a way, maybe the crew become more solid, more involved, because they have one big objective, being more green. And it can be silly to think about it, but it's not. It's something else.
Yeah, it's really interesting. That collective approach, I think, is something that's going to be a theme running through this panel, that everyone taking responsibility on the creative side as well as on the business side is a big deal. Can I bring in Veronique at this point? So, first of all, Veronique, tell us about the establishment and the objectives of the Green Shot.
Mentioned Albert, there is new certifications in many countries, but so it's something that we do in addition, etc. It's a quick calculation. We think it's really much better to bring sustainability inside the actual production during the workflows, and so basically we have an app that does that. So we connect operations, batches, on-tracks, etc. to CO2 footprints in a sort of single continuum. It also means that we monitor CO2 footprints in real time. But we also, I would say, divide them because we have them at individual level. So each crew member has his or her own footprint, etc. It also means that people feel much more empowered. Séverine was mentioning, you know, the role of the crew, because when you see kilos of CO2, you feel you can do something about it, whereas you see tons of CO2, you don't really feel involved. So that's basically what we do. And in the course of deploying the green shot, covering the production workflow, we increasingly bringing it upstream in the planification, but also when Pauline invited the green shot to join this, it was really interesting for me, because what we're really trying to do is to really bring this, this information, this approach as soon as possible in the writing, in the creation. So basically that's where we stand today. So it's on the one hand empowering everybody in the production to actually do something, to show, and we've demonstrated in productions last year, that you can actually save money by going green, and 3, really getting this inside as soon as possible.
That's great. There's a number of themes I think you've picked up that will go through this whole conversation. One is that idea that you just put at the end there, that actually there are positive benefits. It still sometimes feels, when we talk about environmental change, that we are talking about obligations and problems that have to be dealt with. It's something we're stuck with. And I think in your case, in the case we're going to hear later on, it's about the creative potential that comes out of this, but the saving money side of this, can you just give us some examples of how that works? Because the notion of that you could save by doing this is perhaps something that isn't necessarily in the culture of the way people talk about it.
Yes, so I mean, very concretely, we had 2 different productions last year out of the whole productions, where we actually have, you know, we saved over 50K on fairly small budgets, and also some CO2 on that. The connection between the saving, it's really because you are acting at every specific level where you can act. It can be decreasing the cost of what you do in waste management. It can also be decreasing the cost of transport. When you manage to choose solutions that are closer to your location, you are saving money in this environment. So we have these 2 reports have been presented, so we can also share them. But they basically, in every different part of the movie production activities, show why you can save. And we had a very simple example. In one case, we had 4 days of shooting where we had 200 crew people, and they rented bikes for 4 days instead of having cars. It saved money, it saved footprint, of course, and it also brought a sense of enthusiasm, because people were also freer they didn't have to plan, you know, they didn't have to group, etc. And so the whole thing was really very positive. Now, this was a lower saving, both in CO2 and in money, but it's when you add up all this information, because the thing is that in the saving of productions, a lot of people say, okay, you know, it's energy, transport, and once we've done that, that's enough. This is not what's happening. When you start empowering people, you have very specific areas where you can start saving money. And this includes planning where you are going to shoot. So increasingly, we managed to anticipate what a potential footprint would be and a potential budget of where you are shooting. If you are shooting and you can connect to a grid, not bringing large generators, etc., you are saving a lot of money. If you manage to have even a few days without generators, you save money. So it's very concrete, but it also means that when you are writing, if you can think about locations that you know will be can be cheaper, but also less impactful, it's really super interesting. So something that you said, managing a positive approach to all this greening part is super important.
Yeah, and you know, I think that word empowerment is one we'll borrow as we talk through the rest of it as well, empowering people along. I just wanted to ask you one thing that jumps out from the film industry perspective in particular, and TV as well, but I think particularly the film industry, is the savings really come, and the approach really comes by joining up the workflow. And famously, the film industry still works along rather divided specialisms. You know, there's the writer, then there's the director, and then it feels this linear approach, which can be quite wasteful, particularly when you're at the distribution and exhibition stage. But the idea of putting together that full workflow that is from cradle to grave for a film still feels to me like quite a big challenge. Has that proved to be a challenge for you?
I think there are different challenges. There's anyway an adoption challenge in general, because people have been doing things in a certain way, and they feel, you know, why should we change now? That is sort of starting to change. But the second part is this shouldn't hamper the creativity. And that's very important. And that's why I would say it's a challenge that people, I mean, all this environment is about creativity. Things like, you know, production, etc., in a sense is a support to a creative approach. So I would say the challenge is, how do we give examples of, I would say, tuning of creativity or of writing that can really have impacts? And for that, this is why not only we, I mean, everybody, and the work that Séverine and the lab are doing is great for that. It's bringing very concrete examples in the training, in applications. You know, we have applications, other people are selling applications to show that this can happen. And so sharing best practices also in this production world with people who don't do productions but who write is very important. For instance, one thing we're doing, we coming out with a simulation based on location, and what you take into account for location, which crew members are closer to that location, which catering solutions are you going to have, what energy solutions, etc. And in some cases, it will also be comparing, live shooting, on-set shooting versus outside shooting, etc. So there are lots of different parameters. And even if there are bigger ones, in the end, we think that this continuum is what will, I would say, bring a shift into which parameters are actually important in the evolution of that.
That's wonderful, Veronique, and it actually pulls us brilliantly into the next part of the discussion, because creativity and the idea that actually doing things differently can actually create a creative push is actually a really interesting one, which brings me to you, Bill. So first of all, for those who don't know, give us an idea. You've created a kind of manifesto, a starting point for a movement around that exact balance of creativity and sustainability. Just first of all, introduce this new document to the industry.
Yeah, hi. What we as directors are passionate about is storytelling. And we feel that storytelling is under threat. The sustainability of storytelling is under threat because the industry is gravitating towards directors becoming shot gatherers, not storytellers. And obviously, we don't like that. And so,
Bill, you better just explain that difference.
What would a shot gatherer is the American model of a director, where you turn up on the shoot and you shoot lots of shots, you cover it all, and then you spend about a few days in the edit, and then you disappear, and someone else finishes off the story, tells the story. And quite often what directors as shot gatherers feel is that you're collating fonts for someone else to sort of cut up and make a kidnap ransom note. And what you want to do is beautiful calligraphy, where you actually write something which every aspect of the handcrafted font is part of the DNA of your story. So we want to be proper authors of an audiovisual story, rather than some kind of ringmaster technician who gathers shots for other people to splice together.
Beautifully done, beautifully done. So, so we've got this crash. So to bring you back in, we got this crash between the creative impulse, the desire to tell a story, and the churn of this of just pointing things and someone else's. It's the industrialization process. So carry on.
Yeah. So we would love to. We're very passionate about being storytellers and resisting this shot gathering thing, and so we primarily came to this from a kind of creative sustainability angle, and then the environmental sustainability. We wanted to kind of symbiotically combine it so that actions that we could perform as directors, as creatives in our industry, would at the same time as being carbon saving, would stimulate directors to greater creativity. We didn't want to just make a kind of plant-based meat burger for McDonald's that tasted exactly the same as their usual burger. We wanted to kind of take all the creativity and invention that might go into creating something better than a plant-based piece of meat and make something delicious and different and unique and special and local. So we started to look, we were inspired by the Dogma 95 movement, which was a set of vows of chastity, and it was about getting back to basics of directing. It was about very, very specific technical limitations to the director. You can't do this, you have to do that. Here's a restriction, there's a restriction, but they were all designed to provoke creativity. What are you going to do to solve that restriction? How are you going to overcome it? Because you ain't going to overcome it by going, well, it's difficult. You're going to have to be creative. And that creativeness will end up being experienced by the audience. And so that was appealing. And then we were also very taken with the slow food movement, which was about kind of creating local food, which was grown in a local terroir, in a local climate, a total local environment, and is delicious and nutritious and cheap. And so we thought these two things are inspirations to us. And so what we've come up with is a bit like in the Dogma 95 manifesto. We've come up with a manifesto with 10 principles which we hope would combine the symbiosis of ecological climate benefit with creativity which audiences will enjoy. So it doesn't become a chore or a duty that the audiences won't actually even experience the difference when they sit in the cinema, knowing that you've been a little bit ecological with things here and there. Even if you're using half the carbon, is the audience's experience any different in their experience of the story? We wanted to make their experience better. And what we felt was that, of course, Veronique and SEVERINE are involved in trying to go upstream from production, the industrial making of the film, and get ecological awareness and carbon awareness upstream. But what we felt was that the main efforts currently of greening production occur when production starts, when you're crewing up, when you're starting to spend a lot of money, when you're starting to burn a lot of carbon. And what we felt was that was too late. That there were stories that are being told which are already committing billions of tons of carbon into the air, and even with all the best practices of greening, you are still committed to those billions of tons because this story requires being told that way, and there's no way of avoiding it. Well, we believe there is. So what we are trying to do as directors is promote storytelling which actually will stimulate creativity and reduce carbon. And we feel, and I know that there's been a lot of conversation about writers, and it's very, very important that writers are involved, but writers are not the people who on set, on location, have to deliver the footage, who have to actually shoot the stuff that's going to end up in, for the audience to experience. They don't experience what you have to do when you're in a muddy field and it's 4 o'clock in the morning and the tractor's stuck and it's in your way. and they don't have to solve things like that. I mean, we are the down, low, and dirty problem solvers of actual production. And so I think, and we have these 10 principles.
Just give us a couple there that give us a flavour that where you feel that particularly where you feel it actually promotes a different kind of your creative decision making is actually influenced by it.
Okay, so well, I'll give you two. I'll give you the most inflammatory one, the biggest challenge, and they are challenges, and we are hoping that this first one almost provokes a response of, that's impossible. And then your next thought is, how do we do that? In the same way as if you're shooting a massive stunt one day, and in the afternoon, the key element of your huge shot that you're going to do that day can't come. You have to make it work that afternoon with what you've got. Anyway, so this is here's one challenge. Principle number one, the circle of life. I, as a director, will find my story inside a circle I will draw on a map. The radius of this circle will be 100 kilometers. Everything and everybody I will need to make my story is already part of the living culture there. I will use nothing from outside the circle to tell my story. I positively embrace this restriction as a spur to greater creativity. That's one. Another one, to best capture the essence of the energy we create together on set, I will author my story through skillfully selected camera positions and takes, which will minimize the number of setups and time a scene will require. No generic spray and pray shot gathering. I will limit my shooting ratio to 5:1 to stimulate this creative storytelling rigor. There are 8 more.
Yeah, and we're not going to go through all 8 of them, Bill, but because I want to bring Martin in as well on this as someone who is both on the board and as someone who, again, like you, Bill, on a day-to-day basis would be putting these in. So let's just be clear on this. There's 2 great examples of how this thing works. The problem and the problems that they address. So in your case, the first one of building within a community seems to address a frustration that I suspect lots of people feel, that the connection between shoots and community is weak at best. And actually sometimes there's a feeling that shoots, they come in, they have no sense of place, they come in, they do their stuff, they get their tax break and then they disappear. That seems to be one that you're resolving and saying, well, that sense of place is actually critical to the creative decisions we make. And the second one is more of that back to the future thing as well, which is that feeling that a part of the problem today is created by this digital illusion of there being no limit to anything, that we can just shoot and shoot and shoot forever because it doesn't matter. It's we can always pick it up in the edit suite. And what you're talking about there creatively is going back to a time when you have to think about what you're going to shoot. You make your creative decisions, which is another part of this manifesto, within the light that you have there, within the equipment that you can take into your now. As someone who's worked, you know, at pretty much every level, with the streamers down to the kind of film fund stuff, what you are being involved in this process as well. How does that make you feel as a filmmaker? Does it grab you as something exciting and dynamic immediately, or do you feel like it's a challenge that you need to take on that could be complex and difficult?
Well, it's both. I mean, I love a challenge. I think anybody who's a director is a director because they love a challenge. Overcoming challenges is what spikes creativity and what makes you grow and what creates great stories. So I love the word connection that you mentioned, because a drama series I made last year was a story about climate change, and the thing is, when we started the project, how do you tell a story about climate change? It's so big, we had no idea how to tell that story. And our solution was to make it as small as possible. Let's tell a story about the big thing of climate change by focusing on a few very normal people in an everyday environment and see what happens, how climate change affects them on a very basic human here and now level. So making it very small made it possible to tell this large story. And when we went into production, we also scaled down as much as we could. We made it really small, so we chose a very small environment right around where I live, actually. So we were in the 10-kilometer zone, not even 100. And we sourced everything from there. And it's really funny because working, instead of just going somewhere and filming and going out, because I was living there, right? So we had, after a day's shoot, you're still there. So you're at the baker in the line, and you're meeting people who are there shooting, and you're part of this community, and the community feels part of you, and that taps into a sense of responsibility as a director you have as well. You have a sense of, what am I doing here? What kind of story am I telling with you? And that is a very different dimension, I think, to filmmaking, and makes you very grounded and makes you very aware of what your role as a storyteller is and what the function of storytelling is and production of storytelling. So it adds so much to working as a director. And I think that's also very much part also in the slow food movement, for instance, being very aware of your surroundings, where things come from, what the function is that you're doing. I think for me, that is key. And if that kind of awareness happens, it not only triggers your creativity, because you have to be very creative. You don't have everything around you, so you have to think, how can we do this in this small area? And it really adds to that. But it also adds to building a social environment around yourself as a storyteller.
I'm wondering, there's a kind of back to the future element to this as well, which it kind of reminds me a little bit of the punk rock thing, where they kind of recreated the 1950s after the kind of excesses of the prog rock stuff, and it was going back to absolute basics. But in a sense, what you're calling for is to go back to probably the most creative times of filmmaking. I was thinking of of Rossellini in Rome in 1945. You know, you only have X amount of film, and you have a community that you live within, and you have the responsibility, of course, but actually the creative process is changed potentially in very positive ways if you know there are limits to what you can use. And actually you might be painting with a different palette, a smaller palette, but actually it also narrows the choices in ways that actually make you have to think more creatively. And there is an argument that all this is about the fact that so much of film now feels like it's been created by algorithms. It feels like we've reached a stage where you're not having to think in this huge creative way. And the irony is, getting smaller might force you to be more creative than actually just following the money of big commissioners from the streamers.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's all, I mean, one of the big things you do as a director is to be aware of your surroundings and using that for your story. And if you somehow limit yourself or create a challenging environment, something new comes out of that which surprises you. An example for our drama series, we wanted to use the least amount of energy or lamps and that kind of thing. So we had a lot of night scenes, and then in the old days it was very normal to shoot day for night, right? You shoot during the day with special blue filters and it looks like night. But now with the digital light sensitive cameras, that's not done anymore. People are not used to doing that. But we did not want to bring any big lights in, so we decided we're going to shoot day for night, which was really exciting to try. We did tests of that, and we really had to adjust the story, the settings, the locations to be able to shoot a convincing way, and it creates a style which now when people see it it's specifically called the certain look of the project. It's something which people admire, and it's a creative choice, but it came out of this very basic urge to have less of a footprint. So this challenge to overcome created something which is now the style of the whole series. This just as an example that it can really grow and it can change. I mean, I think creativity doesn't come from a brilliant thought behind your desk. You know, it comes from everyday stuff around you, and I think we should really try to feed ourselves with reality and community and work with that and create a new new story building, new story worlds which are grounded and can be very, very freeing.
I think that's where we start seeing the idea of a movement coming out of this, because there's another element to this too, which is it's lower cost, it's less reliant on big technology, and it feels to me like that if you're looking to how do we increase diversity, how do we get new voices in, it feels like a more accessible approach to filmmaking than the encouragement towards the big, the fantastical, the very tech-driven stuff.
I think that what we're hoping to do is inspire the notion that the fewer resources you have, in conventional terms of resources, the more resourceful you have to be. The resource you have to be the resource. And I think that is definitely a kind of wake-up call to everybody. And also, in terms of, you know, I don't know, the punk rock thing, it means you don't need a lot of money. I mean, you really don't. And that's not, we don't want to make sure that's not seen as being an excuse and a kind of niche thing. I mean, what we want to be doing is actually having these principles stimulate an ecologically green way of making films that are really good, not pale imitations of good stories, but really good films, which will reach a wide audience. You know, it was kind of interesting that in Dogma 95, one of the things they said was there will be no genre movies. Genre movies are not allowed, and we're saying all stories and all genres are encouraged because audiences like them, and you can tell stories in all genres this way. You know, if you're resourceful, and so we're not saying that this is going to end up in a backwater of niche wannabe second best. We're saying this will actually could be the cutting edge of the nouvelle vague, if you like.
No, it's interesting. That word niche, I always think as a stick to beat the independent industry with. You have now a world which is largely driven on one side by algorithms, which I think is what you're saying, and it's going to get better and more effective with the AI kind of involvement from the big streamers at one end, and maybe more of a kind of patrician side of the bigger public funds deciding this is what a BFI film looks like or whatever else. And it feels like everything between those two is being written off as niche. And you think, well, that's where I live. That's the world, is that bit in the middle. And I think that that I think is part of what's driving the idea that we'll come back to, if we may, into the idea of how you might turn this into a movement. Séverine, I think this goes back to what you and Veronique were saying. I'm going to bring her in as well at the moment. It feels like I was just thinking as you were going through, a lot of this is about taking waste, the unnecessary, out of this thing. It's about getting down to things that really matter. And you know, the waste in shooting non-stop shots and then trying to repair them in an editing studio or with CGI. And that idea of getting rid of waste seems to me a really interesting driving factor that can be quite creative. Is that something which, when you're doing your lab, do you see people having these same kind of light bulb moments where they're thinking, yeah, I've got to get rid of these things because it's a problem, but actually, wouldn't it be great? What if it spurs their imagination? Do you see that happening in the labs?
Yeah. Usually people think about giving things to charities, or to reuse it. We have a lot of, during the lab we have a lot of lectures all together, and then the participants work in group. And when they work in group, you can see them thinking about new solutions. And in a way, they they never have the time, or they don't think they have the time to think about that kind of things. So yes, giving to charities is the first thing it comes to mind, usually.
Yeah, I think what I'm really interested in, I think that's the point you're making, is there is the top-down approach, which says you will do sustainability, and here's a big policy decision taken somewhere that everyone has to live to. And then there's the bottom-up. That's people who are in this field working together, who get that idea that maybe they can influence these things. It's Veronique's empowerment that maybe what's missing is that notion of the creative from underneath driving sustainability rather than the top-down.
Maybe the time, because usually people don't think they have the time to think and to think in a wider way, to think about new solutions, to ask new questions too. And after the lab, usually they told you that they understood that they had to take time before everything, before the production begins, to think more about all the process.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great advert for Torino Film Lab's general philosophy as well, which is you should be starting thinking about these things at the earliest stages, not adding them on as you go through. And the development stage, I mean, I think this is true of the best public funds, the regional public funds. There is a feeling that we need to be putting our energy into development rather than throwing it at a production which then just disappears into the ether somewhere. So I think that notion is a really useful one. Just quickly, do you recognise, having been in the slow food movement for a while, do you recognise the similarities in any way between what they're trying to achieve here and that slow food movement?
Yeah, absolutely. For the slow food philosophy, the food is tied with every aspect of the life, and with politics, culture, agriculture, obviously, environment, and our food choices are the one who influence how the food is cultivated, produced, and distributed. So, and in that way, we can change the world. And it's a choice. And I think that with that eco-movie, it's always a matter of choice. You choose to act in a way or in another. And that slow food had a big success because of the communities. Small communities working together, and they were more powerful, for sure.
Yeah, we're back to empowerment. Maybe I could be Veronique about this again. I think the notion of empowerment is so critical to this that nothing works unless you have inspired an idea somewhere that people feel they are empowered to push in some kind of ways. And there is some element, I think, sometimes when you have a lot of top-down things, you're in an industry where a lot is coming through, you know, the money is at some different level than you, that somehow you're helpless. But actually that idea of empowering and building from the bottom seems to me an idea that needs to have its day. Veronique, is that you were hearing about this manifesto? Do you recognise your idea of empowerment in what they're doing?
Yes, I think, I mean, I'm actually really interested in getting the other 8 principles from Bill, because I think the circle, for instance, is a very, I think it's a very powerful concept, because again, it's very, okay, this is my, you know, geographical limitation, the 5-to-1 shooting ratio, etc. I think all that is giving concrete steps to empowerment. And so, you know, I've been, so people from our team have been through the TFL training. They came back really excited about what Séverine was saying, new ideas, etc. So I think that empowerment actually, so doing it bottom up, as you said, is key to success. I mean, really key. And so, you know, having the training, having all the different parts in place. But I think also, again, coming back to, I would say, the positive mindset about all this adventure, rather than just, this is yet something else to manage. Key, indeed, is to find the time to think earlier, because savings, concrete approaches is when you do it earlier. When you do it in urgency, it's always at best, it's going to be greenwashing, to be very honest. So you need to get this in earlier. But I think also, for instance, there are areas where people don't realize that you can really win. I give you an example. We run a study on costumes. Actually, it was a study just comparing, costumes made on purpose for a shoot versus costumes in brand placement. And in fact, if you get well-organized brand placement, which gives you costumes used locally, not of course shipped from Paris to I don't know where, etc., you can actually not only save money, but you'll also get more money because you're giving a sustainable way of doing brand placement in a shoot. Of course, if you understand this and you can bring it earlier in your writing, etc., I think you are moving away from this turn up on the shoot and then just let someone else finish the complete thing, and get it, give these concrete examples, but put them in the hand of everybody. So not empowering people in the productions, empowering people earlier, beforehand, etc. And that's a lot of the work everybody's doing.
Yeah, and it also, earlier on, we were, before this discussion, we had a workshop, and one of the things that came out is that film is really collective, but actually the people who are empowered in general or feel empowered tend to be a very small number of those. But you're talking about, particularly if you take the idea of working within a specific community, you have a lot of people within that community who could actually play an important role within the creation and making of work, which in turn would probably make them feel more inclined even to join the audience of that film, or indeed be involved in the industry more broadly. So I think what you're pointing to here is this collective experience is something we should embrace, and maybe the mythologies around the auteur have been overplayed. Maybe it is time we started recognizing the collective side of film more than perhaps we have done. So I think that's really useful, Veronique. I'll come back to you on a couple of these, but I want to get these guys and your manifesto idea here, because I think what you're hearing from Veronique and Séverine is actually looking from a different angle. It's exactly what you're talking about. It is empowerment. It's about potentially new filmmakers and new voices and real diversity coming from underneath, taking advantage of yes, that responsibility. But it feels like there's a movement potentially here. But what turns a few things on a page into an idea that this could be a movement that people in this room might wish to be involved with?
Well, I think that although sometimes it feels like there's sort of a few of us on the board of FERA, just thinking up some nice wheezes about what we might do to restrict ourselves to be creative and be green. We speak for 25,000 European screen directors in 35 countries across Europe, and from the UK to Lithuania, to it's really small Eastern European countries, to Germany with big film industries in Munich and Berlin and things like that. So what we feel is that if we can inspire screen directors to believe that this will be something which will be challenging but exciting and fun and raise their game and make them leap out of bed at 3:30 in the morning to get the car to go to, or the bike to go to the shoot in the rain in winter, that will be a significant thing. And what we absolutely understand is that not every film can be made this way. We're not going to stop James Bond from being made and burning carbon like it's going out of fashion. And we don't want to stop that. That's kind of fun. fine. But what we're sort of saying is that there is this way of making films which will be much more creatively satisfying and is much more accessible to more people and will connect you more to the world that you are trying to tell stories to. And this the idea of connection. You then you understand the world better for the next story that you want to tell. As well as provide, work for people locally. I mean, I'm sure that your experiences of telling a story in your community opened your eyes to aspects of your community that you'd never seen, even though you lived there and could consider yourself a member of that, an active member of that community. So I think that we need to excite the directors. That's what we can do. We can't make principles or vows about refreezing the polar ice caps. It's not what we can do. But what we can do is we can get 25,000 directors passionate and excited about doing this. I was going to just pick up on one thing that you said, Severin, when you were talking about people saying they didn't have the time to think about waste management, and you helped them do that. It seems to me, in my humble experience in my life, whenever I have to face some sort of difficult decision, which I know is going to be probably a bit paradigm shifting if I do it, and I don't really understand how to do it, I say, I haven't got time to do it. It's too complicated. My resistance is all, it'll never work and all this kind of thing. You do it once, and you understand it, and you change your mind, and suddenly it doesn't take any time at all. It's actually relatively straightforward. It's relatively easy. It's just that you haven't done it before. And so I think it's about this, I think that's how you change people's minds, is actually showing them that it's possible. And you're doing it there. And they don't need to come back and be told it again. They've got it. Yeah. They can run with it.
Yeah, usually people tend to leave the decision to somebody else, It's easier.
Yeah. But is that, bringing Martin in on this, I hear from filmmakers there is a frustration. Bill was talking about the cultural dangers that are going on. I do think at the moment the fact there's a production boom going on, largely driven by streamers, means that people are a bit wealthier. But even some of those who are taking money, there is a sense that maybe I don't know whether you see it from filmmakers, that they're frustrated. There is a feeling that there's something that's gone missing from European filmmaking.
Yeah, I think people are really hungry for change. There are so many voices not heard, stories not being told, people from the outside trying to knock in this industrialized system we're in, where there's no room or no place for them because it's too small a story, it's not big enough in scope, whatever the reasons are. And sometimes these projects do get made, they are crowdfunding, and you notice that they do have an audience and they do have a legitimacy, and there's suddenly stories which you've never heard of people you've never heard of who you might be living next door to, yet you're not hearing those stories. And when they get made, they do have urgency and reach an audience. And I'm hoping something like this is a way for people to find some kind of community, let's say, of filmmakers to make this change possible, to hang on to, and to have a sense of not being alone in standing outside, but joining forces and actually making this system change and showing that there is another way and there are other stories to be told, other ways to tell the stories.
I'm wondering whether it feels like a very risk-averse time at the moment. It feels like we've been through a period of pandemic followed by a big period where costs have been going up and there's economic issues. And I do hear, I was in Berlin, the most depressing conversations I had quite regularly with distributors was people don't really want what they were calling sad films. They don't want challenging films anymore. And this, whenever I hear the word people want, that's always a good reason to release the safety catch on your revolver, because that's the point at which you think, how do you know? These assumptions get stuck in your head, and it feels like this movement that you're talking about here is really about saying, well, hold on a second, before we start accepting that the audience will no longer watch things that are absolutely central to the European cultural tradition, maybe if we could make those things in different ways, make those things perhaps a bit more cheaply, make those things with the audience in those early stages, maybe there are opportunities that are not recognized.
Absolutely, I think that's there are many examples of this. quite happy, for instance, with the recent success, not as the sustainable example, but of something different, like the film Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is a film which goes against all the rules, right? It's no genre, it's basically every genre, and there's a lot of fault with that, but it's something completely different than the Avatar 18, which is coming out, the sequels of the Marvels, everything which is the same, and audiences are receptive and hungry for that. And I think that if something is made with passion and conviction, not just by one auteur, but by a community, with a community, I think that really that's what audiences are hungry for and really respond to. I'm quite sure of that.
Yeah.
And I think that also, I mean, when you say, distributors saying, oh, people don't want stories that are sad, well, you know, guess what? People have sadness in their life. We all do. And we want stories that actually connect to the lives we lead. And we also want to go and watch Minions 27 and the latest Marvel Universe 2. Well, I mean, you know, you can. But you know, on the one hand, you know, we can learn to understand some lunatic sci-fi story about Captain, you know, Nonsensible or whatever. And at the same time, the stories that really connect to us are when we see our fellow human beings that we can relate to, who don't have superpowers, you know, and those are the stories that really touch us and move us and excite us. And comedy, you know, there's not, I don't know how much comedy, you know, Marvel comedy, I mean, comedy is about fallible human beings like us. Comedy, you know, I mean, so many of these stories, as you say, there's a movie. Could you imagine pitching a story about a chemistry teacher who becomes a drug dealer, who's got cancer? Who's dying of cancer? You know, that's never going to go anywhere, Breaking Bad. You know, a bunch of New Yorkers are going to sit around drinking coffee in a cafe. Friends. I mean, you know, there has to be some kind of passion to connect with what real people really want.
Yeah, I think the argument that is coming from all four of you really is that the sense of place and community is actually critical to this. That maybe what we've seen is a disconnection between an industrial film and a community, so it feels inauthentic. You know, things that feel authentic are the ones that it feels like it's taking place somewhere. It's a place that I could recognize and that I could see people in, but that disconnection from place seems to me a problem, which I guess backs up your point, Martin. Yeah,
no, I live in Amsterdam, and once in a while we have an American film crew coming in for a series, and they shoot scenes, whatever, in Amsterdam, and it's, you know, it's not at all the Amsterdam that I know or see. So I think a big part of the storytelling is that it's also you're the right voice to tell the story, and you're part of the world of where you're telling the story from, because that tells something which is true and shows you something which is not cliche and which is something very different than you might know. So yeah,
and that will feel fresh. And will feel kind of new. One of the things that we were talking about is that the most sustainable way to proceed with film production is to decide to make no more new films. There are more films already than we can watch in a lifetime. Lots of them are really good. So if we're going to make some new ones, let's make them fresh and count and real and for real people living today. Otherwise, check out the back catalogue. It's great.
Yeah, I think that point, I think Veronique was kind of getting to that as well, is that idea that actually it's not the making of films, it's the fact we're making films that no one sees is problematic. And I think that this all may be tied together, but Severine, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I was thinking about what you told earlier. I live in Torino, Italy, and one day it happened to have a lot of cars in the city. It was the new Fast and Furious production, but it was in Rome. But Rome was too expensive, so they came to Torino. But it wasn't Torino at the end. So we had a lot of crash and a lot of beautiful cars, and that's it. There's nothing left at the end, nothing. And it wasn't sustainable at all.
No, and I think this goes back to, I think, some of the concern about the way that the film incentives have been working, that I think probably needs some reassessment now that we're paying money for people to come into our communities, come in, eat their own food, do their own thing, and then disappear. I'm going to take a couple of questions if I can, but first of all, I'm actually going to pick on someone in the audience here, if I may, which is Patrick, who's from the Hessen Film Fund. Because I think I mean, I think there's a difference between regional film funds and national film funds in these things, but from a film funding point of view, it feels like there's something in here which fits some of the public funding kind of priorities as well, particularly in terms of those regions. When you listen to these things, is it something you feel fits within your notion of how a regional film fund should work?
Absolutely. I think ecological sustainability is a question we cannot get around these days. I think something that gets sometimes lost in this discourse is that you have to look at ecological sustainability along topics like social sustainability, diversity, who gets access, and I was just at a panel upstairs during lunchtime, and there also the future of German film was discussed, and what kind of DNA the new German film should have. And I think the manifesto is an idea or a direction of new stories that can be told. And replying to what you said, I think also an external gaze can have a value in a way. I think the problem with an external gaze these days has been that it's mostly white and masculine in a way. But then in general, I think that the regional stories or the stories that your neighbor tells, your neighbor that you haven't met yet, I think that is something that's also ecological sustainable. And what we're working on is that we're trying to reduce the demands that movies are shot in our region when we're funding them, just to avoid that there's like a traveling circus that just pollutes our planet.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point that that actually, in terms of diversity, actually, if you have greater involvement within communities when you're there, either the community that you're in or your filmmakers giving a different eye on something else, it feels to me like diversity comes in the interaction with communities, and it does feel sometimes when we're doing film shoots that people are coming in and they're not interacting in any way. They even when they have the community in it, which is your point, Severine, you do it in Torino, but it's not a Torino that exists in real life, which means it becomes a cliche, which actually can be quite damaging in some ways, I think.
Yeah, and that's actually a big part of the history of regional film funds. I mean, even here in our region, we had a lot of projects like that. And as you said, there's nothing left after those projects leave. I mean, it doesn't flow into the structures. Maybe they're, I don't know, booking hotels or stuff like that, or some caterers, but it doesn't really serve the structures.
Okay, I think that's another really interesting element that could go into here, that we're looking at the coalition that might be being created around this movement. We'll come to that. Thanks, Patrick. I've just really appreciated that. Did anyone else have any questions?
Just think of something about when you get the local community involved in the production, maybe that we have a different kind of distribution interest for the local cinemas. Because if you've been shooting there, maybe you can have that kind of attraction, because that is also one thing. Who goes to cinemas today? Maybe, I mean, it's up and down depending on countries. Because I think that is another benefit, because maybe people in where you shot the film will be more interested to see it as well. So you get that as another benefit.
Yeah, I think when I was talking a second ago, the idea of a coalition which goes from Veronique's empowerment that starts when you're in a community making a film with a specific structure, I think that coalition doesn't stop with the film itself. Actually, the audience, engaging the audience and getting them involved. If you're in a community and it's authentic to that community, you would expect that community to turn up in quite big numbers as well and feel it's their film. But I think a lot of people, whatever you've done, there is that period where you make something about an area, and then when you go in, it's foreign to them. And I think that's true of geography, it's true of class, it's true of race, it's true of so many things that something's made about you, and you think, what the hell has this got to do with me? So how you bring the audience into this, I think, is really interesting.
I was just going to say, I made a film in Liverpool about a Liverpool dockers strike. And the script had been co-written by 16 dockers and their wives, and the port stewards who ran the union were executive producers, and we made the film with dockers who we tried to give employment to where possible. And we, I mean, what was kind of interesting about the production, as much as possible, but we would think, what work can we give people? They were still on strike. They had no money. I mean, we had money, so we thought, well, they can do location security. They're big, they're strong, they know the local area, they can scare people off. And so we said we need to employ 6 people to do location security. Fantastic. Our consciences were feeling cleaner by the second. And then the port stewards then came back and said, absolutely not. Not for those hours, not for that money. And we were going, we're just paying the going rate. They went, we're not doing it. And so the local community were turning all our presuppositions about on her, but then you had to kind of respect that. They were not going to work the way that we work. But the point was that it was their story, and we were hugely responsible for us getting their story right for a wide audience and them. And I think this is where, you're talking about doing it in a place that you will be inspired and stimulated to make the local story of the striking docker and his son a universal story about why we need to have trade unionism or protecting work conditions, or why you want that for your children, a means to survive, earn a living. And I think that, everybody who worked on this particular show was going in like we're going in with, fantastic motives and all this kind of thing. And we all had ourselves turned upside down by what we found there, but then we were reformed into, new creatures with a different political paradigm in our heads.
Yeah, I mean, that's another big part of community-based shooting and doing the stuff. The responsibility is also, if we're seeing sustainability as about not both reducing your carbon footprint and at the same time creating relationships and legacies within wherever you are, there's a kind of there's a bullshit detector there. You can't go in there and pretend. I mean, you've got to actually go in and do this. You've got to live up to what you're saying. I just want to bring in Veronique. I'm aware we're reaching towards the end of our time, but Veronique, the audience, where does that final relationship with the audience, does that come into the discussions you're having when you're putting together your work? And is that sense of potential connections with the audience important in what the Green Shot's doing? You need to turn your mic on. Oh, still off. So many buttons.
I'm muted. Yeah, I'm sorry. So 2 parts in that. Point 1, we would love to have the connection to the audience. There was a mention also about the impact on community, because whereas of course what we are doing, we monitoring carbon footprint, etc., just because people need numbers, even if the numbers are indications, to be honest. We would love to reach a connection with the local community, so having activities around the shoot that connects to the community, including in education, including in slow food, etc. But now coming to the audience, there was an ECPF event last 2 weeks ago in Brussels, and we actually had one of the panels where we said, to the distributor, saying how important it is for you that a film can demonstrate a complete life cycle approach to sustainability. Is this going to impact our distribution? They were polite about the answer, but the short answer was, well, no, not yet. So I think there's obviously an opportunity there, but they are still downstream from what we are trying to do. So I think the work done by the community at large is really very much moving upstream, and we don't yet, at least we haven't yet figured out how to actually reach out to the audience. We're starting to connect to the distribution part of the chain, but we need to get that chain involved to have them use or be, I would say, aware of the impact it can have. So it's a dream for me, but it's not yet implemented.
No, I think that's an honest answer, Veronique, and I think it's quite important that we don't end up here being with dreams, like when we say, oh, the audience would like would really like these more community-based films. I think you have to prove it in some way. I mean, it's all very well saying it, but we can be as that has no more evidence backing it up than no one will watch these films. I think, in a sense, the missing link is going to be start showing me things which actually are done this way that actually demonstrate what can be done. I would argue that history has given you a ton of those things, actually. If you look back historically, lots and lots of films. I mean, you can go back to a Bout de Souffle, you know, that you've got, and certainly if you look at something like Varda's The Gleaners or those kind of films, you've got a whole history of European film that was based on a very clear sense of a place with limited budget, with a limitation to the amount of film you could shoot, and with a very clear kind of locational trend on there. I think it's how do you move from the point where you're being theoretical, and Veronique has very honestly said, I think, you know, this still feels like it's a bit of a distance from where we are now. How are you going to move to the point where this movement starts demonstrating that it actually has some validity in terms of what happens on the ground?
Well, I think we're just going to make some films this way. End of. And some good ones that people like. And I think that'll do it. I mean, that's not easy. And, you know, we're saying we've got a list of challenges. So it's designed not to be easy. But I think the thing is, you know, there is... I think there's a really, you know, I can tell you, I don't know about audiences, but there's a real appetite amongst storytelling directors for this kind of challenge. A real appetite.
So I think what you need and what's missing at the moment is we have an idea for a movement. Everything you're saying underpins the logic of it, that actually going all the way from Veronique and Séverine's... I mean, Séverine, I think, has a particularly interesting thought here, which goes back to the Torino Film Lab about get the development stage right, start working on these things and start building these ideas at the very earliest stages of development of films, not later, but at those early stages. What your responsibility, it seems, you've got a set of really great ideas, but what is the steps? What are the necessary steps to actually turn it into something which is not a nice sheet of paper, but something that feels like there's action there? Have you already got a plan? And how, at the moment, can anyone see the manifesto? What's your plan for publication first, and then the rollout?
Well, we're going to publish it on the FERA website, and I think we'll also be distributing it via social media. The FERA, I'm not. You guys are more expert on that than me, and I think that, and we're doing this. We're standing up in front of people and passionately advocating it as people who are going to do it. I mean, you know, we're the people who are going to be standing there with the sensitive camera and no lights in the rain at 4 o'clock in the morning in a field in February, shooting this stuff. And we've got big grins on our faces at the prospect of doing it. And we believe we'll be able to tell you better stories doing it that way. So I think that, you know, I think that there is the notion of the director as evangelist here.
Yeah, and presumably it starts with individuals backing this project. It's not rules for everyone. There's got to be a passionate set of advocates that drive this through.
Yeah, the way I see this is let's say a call to arms. Ideally, I'd like to see 10 directors from 10 different European countries step up, being the pioneers, and each creating a film according to the principles. That's for me the next very practical step where we have to aim for, because then that's how you start a movement. That's how you it can be about the films which come out, but it's also about the process then which happens, and these people working on it, talking to their own community of filmmakers in their country about this, and getting people to think about what storytelling means for them and how we can differently approach it, and in the end having 10 pilot films come out,
and maybe 10 authored documentaries by some. We have a lot of members in FERA and the Directors Guilds who are documentarians, and maybe rather than just doing an EPK, What they're doing is, okay, so here's the challenge. You went out into the wild with this manifesto and you're trying to make a film. Let's tell that story as a documentary, so that, you know, for the films which are abject failures, duds, dreadful, that suicidally bad, there may be a brilliant documentary, you know, about the aspiration. We were so nearly there. You've got to love these guys because they tried so hard.
Yeah, I think you know, that's a very pessimistic starting point.
No, I'm saying that I think they would all be.
Normally, you start with a really great thing, and then you move down to the occasional bad one. But the point I think you're getting to is risks. What you'd rather see is someone who's, because this manifesto, it seems to me, when you look at this, what will be lower cost to an extent, it's given you. It limits the time a bit more. It limits your movement, but actually it opens up this perspective. It seems to me that the opportunities are there for risk taking in ways that. Surely that is what we're talking about, the frustration. Surely that is where people are most frustrated, is the feeling that we've entered this risk-averse stage where everything looks a bit the same. You know, everything's 2 stars and 3 stars. I'm not seeing 1 stars or 5 stars. It feels like there's too much stuff that's just not that great and not that bad. And I'd rather see something that took a big risk and flopped, or something that turned out to be amazing, than yet another addition to something which is, it's all right.
I think one of the sort of side effects of that risk averseness is that you effectively make film. You create productions that are director-proof. Writers talk about it openly. Write a script that's director-proof. The director can't screw it up. You know what I mean? Let's take that risk out of it. It also means the director can't make it absolutely brilliant. But let's just not worry about that and make sure they don't screw the whole thing up. So I think that, you know, that's a really key thing. And also for us as directors, it puts the director right back at the helm of the ship in dangerous waters.
Or the shit.
Or the ship in dangerous waters. But I mean, the point is that in this world, the only kind of creative leader, if you like, is the director, because the execs aren't going to turn up on set and fix this, and you know, the broadcasters aren't going to turn up, and so you've got to fix it.
I think the biggest risk basically is not doing anything, because otherwise, as directors, we might as well be the band playing on a sinking Titanic, right? I mean, the world has changed. Things around us are changing. We cannot continue doing the same thing in this world which around us is sinking. We have to pivot. We have to adjust, and by any means necessary. And I think anything that helps that, if it's a set of almost arbitrary tough rules, if that helps us to pivot and to try and get some other people to join us and to get other people to start thinking about it, then it's worth it and it's necessary to do that.
Okay, I'm going to bring Veronique in, but I just think again, I think what you're looking at is a more the idea would be on the ground, which I think Bill's getting to, is it would be much more dynamic, because in a sense it's like a live environment, and the live environment seems to me the bit that is different and about what you're doing. You've got to do this as it goes along. There is much more going on actually in the shoot than maybe would otherwise be the case. Veronique.
Yeah, there were just 2 things I wanted to say. One is that, so when we worked on the app and to actually do the empowerment, we also analyzed the psychology of a dieting application, meaning if you can act on things that you understand in terms of unit, it was really important. And the other thing we're looking at in terms of, you know, the storytelling, etc., is that we had for years a sort of role model that promoted smoking, right? The smoking cowboy was in every movie, cigarette, etc. I think, to be honest, understanding how that mechanism was used is something that could translate into how do you make sustainable approach sexy in the storytelling part. And so obviously I'm not on that side, but it is something that I continuously look at, thinking how did they make it and how did it, and it had a huge impact. Can we translate that into making what the greening also as sexy, positive, etc.?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Veronique. And I think when you were talking about making the making of kind of a documentary alongside this, again, that sense of something different happening on the ground is, there's to use Veronique's term, there's something quite sexy about looking at how these things are being done, that it would feel, I think, more exciting to be involved in these kind of projects. And actually, the harder the rules in a way, the more you might feel the desire to prove this thing. And you know, you are going to have to work with the elements that you're given. There is something really exciting about that has come out of, that's shifted from responsibility and necessity to what if, how great could this be? And I think there's something, to coin a phrase, sexy about that in itself. Just ask, because we're going to kind of wrap up, but is there anyone in the audience got any other points they want to make? Okay, let's just finish off by just quickly going through these things. So just to make sure I'm clear, and you can pick me up on this, from the coalition approach, what we're talking about here is, in a sense, it is a movement anyway. I mean, the whole thing of how do we make sustainable film? I think that we have to start from the standpoint that we have been and still are to an extent making a lot of unsustainable films, that there is a disconnect between community and film, that there is a sense that the industrial process of filmmaking is alienating in terms of the role of everyone, from the, as you say, Veronique said, the costume makers, the communities, but the director themselves, the sense that you are being pushed towards being a shot maker in a risk-free environment. So getting rid of that seems to me, that sense that there is something that you're resolving seems to be stage one in a movement is, what are we against? Well, I think that's clear enough. The second thing, which I think Severine has really brought in that's important, and Veronique to an extent as well, is the process isn't just about the live environment where you're doing this stuff. The process should be going out and working in the development of projects, that actually these things are built into that development stage. It's not about the writer giving you orders. It is about thinking about the audience. It's thinking about the impact and the workflows and so on, so that that early stage is properly thought through. And again, it feels like there's a coalition of interests in your manifesto movement, that maybe the kind of Torino Film Lab or the Green Shot approach, there are partners that seem to be coming through as opportunities. So then we get to the stage, if I'm right, that we haven't been through all these things, but the manifesto is setting yourself challenges. It's saying, and you want them to be tough. You want to say, we're doing things differently. And what we're doing differently does feel like we are reconnecting with communities, seems to be a really big part of this. But we're also reconnecting with European film. We're also going back to some of the traditions that have kind of got lost. We are going back to a form of filmmaking which feels like it's authentic, it belongs somewhere. Even if that is a hit in the big wide world, it should feel like it's a recognizable place, and that seems to be part of what you're doing as well. And again, that green element in this is a factor which is helpful, because we can't keep going on making stuff that's just feels like it's got no limitation. Those limits fit there anyway. So that notion of the creative with the responsibility feels to me like there's a natural fit there. Have I got it right? Is that basically what we're talking about?
Absolutely. And I think that I wanted to kind of just pick up on something that MARTIJN said about the band on the Titanic. And I wanted to kind of just inject an element of urgency about this, because actually, to borrow a kind of ecological metaphor, I think that we're in danger. I think that the storytelling, authoring director is an endangered species. Really. And I think that the way that the cultural environment is evolving around directors. Storytelling directors are going to become extinct, possibly at frightening speed. So there is all of what you said and the Titanic, plus some urgency. I think the clock is ticking louder than any of us are kind of aware of.
Yeah, and I would think that new voices and new directors coming through, they want, you're also potentially losing a generation. You're looking at it thinking, yeah, that's not a job I want to do. What the hell's that? Titanic, of course, was filmed within 100 kilometres. Yeah, there or thereabouts when you... Well, the iceberg was in effects position. You could have made it within your rules, which is worth thinking. So, I think that what you've given here is a vision that seems to me really exciting. It feels to me like you've laid out something which is doable as well as challenging, and those two things together are necessary. And you're addressing real life problems in ways that I think fit a tradition of cultural diversity that's really exciting. So.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I'd like to invite everybody to go. It will be published on our website, or is already just about. The FERA website, screendirectors.eu, and you can read it there. And we invite everybody. It's just a first throw out, so it's something to start a discussion. And we really love any feedback and questions and critique and angry messages and excited messages, anything to get us started and get us moving forward.
Yeah, and you want people to sign up as well. I mean, this is something, if you feel passionate in this way, this is something you can actually be involved with, and there is an invitation to actually help shape the thing as well. It's not a top-down thing here. Has anyone else got anything else they want to add? Okay, well, thanks, Veronique. I thought that was, I really liked the way that you were pulling in that term of empowerment and how you might involve people. It feels to me like a really strong point. Severine, fantastic. I think the lab and that kind of bottom-up approach, and that, again, that feeling that there are things that can be done, and if you sit people down and you go through it, I think that's a fantastic, at that development stage, feels like it's really strong. Bill, they are beautiful poetic words, by the way. When they are published, it's like it's been written by Goethe, we'll say, as we're here. It's exactly. We'll say Shakespeare when we're somewhere else, but I think it's necessary again, and I think this as was said, this is open. You can have a conversation and maybe help shape the way that kind of works. And Martin, I think again, I think a really honest assessment of where they are. But I'm still back to the notion that I think for you, you're the stuff that you're doing on a day-to-day basis, this has grabbed you as something that could be done. You don't have to do these things, but it's something that I think I got from you, that sense that this can connect with audiences and this can connect with communities. And I'm listening to all those and thinking your assertion that this could be what I think is also a Titanic moment, the disconnection between European cultural tradition in terms of film and the audience, that maybe if we want to answer that, this is the moment. So, fantastic. Really enjoyed it talking to you. Can we have a round of applause for the panel? And thanks to this fantastic festival for hosting us. So, hope we'll see lots from this future.
And a round of applause for our wonderful moderator, who's driven this beautifully.